Hello, welcome back. In your ear. I first met Matvei in New York, in Brooklyn, where he lives, and where he's one of the primary movers and shakers behind Ugly Duckling Press, which continues to put out beautiful books, chapbooks, magazines, postcards, pamphlets, and literary ephemera of all types. And they especially focus in putting forth translated works for the first time in English and resurrecting a lot of unjustly neglected writers who may not be known to most American audiences, and helping a lot of young poets get their first works in print, and they are a great organization. Matvei is also really well known for his translations, particularly of the Russian writer Daniel Karm's. He has paperback, now in paperback, version of some of those translations here today. And he's also a fantastic poet in his own right. He's published a number of chapbooks, and his first full-length book, Boris by the Sea, is now out from Octopus Books. So please join me in welcoming Matvei Yankelevich.
Thank you all. Thank you for coming. I'm really happy to be back in this space. And thank you, Maureen, and thank you, Buff. That was really nice of you to get me down here. I'm amazed to hear Chris's work. It was just fantastic, so thank you. I guess I'll read some from this new book, and since I brought it, I'll read a couple of translations from Daniel Karm's and explain something about that, I guess, and then I'll read a longish excerpt from a rather long poem that I've just finished, and this is one of the parts that I'm sort of done it, or I've typed out at least. So anyway, but I'll get to that. So. I don't really know what to tell you about this work other than I worked on it since '95, and I'm really glad that it's finally in book form. And I worked on it rather slowly, as I work on most writing things, and then that the title kind of makes it all self-evident. It's Boris by the Sea. Boris lay flat on the ground and began to watch things happen. It started slow, but things were definitely afoot. Boris got a crazy idea in his head to build something, and he began with himself. He said to his right foot, "Build yourself," and it did. The left foot followed suit. It got boring. He thought he might build something else, but what? A chair. He started by thinking about what it should look like. What is a chair? What makes it a chair? When he opened his eyes, he saw it there before him, and when he closed his eyes again, he fell asleep and dreamed of things he could never build in his room, things he would never see before him once he opened his eyes. Boris, back when he could think, once thought the following thought: nothing should ever be finished, nothing and never, right, and no need to. Anyway, all that exists in the world will always stay on. You can't get rid of the world. More likely the world, is infinite, seeing as it has no end. All that lives and dies in the world stays in it. You can't get rid of the dead. It lies heavily on the earth. Boris lived in his room and thought about why people need each other. People need each other, thought Boris, to check each other for ticks. People need each other for solving the problem of what is inside. Boris looked himself over and realized there were many parts of him that he could not see, and only a small part of these parts was on the surface. The urge to rip out one's own heart arises from this, he thought. Boris dreamt of men who disattached their thoughts from the government of their own organisms. These men could, if they happened to notice their own body, consider it to be somebody else's body and open it up to see what was inside. The surface is never enough for such men. But people need each other to open each other up and see what is inside, and to scratch their backs. Boris reached around and touched his shoulder blade. He wondered what it looked like. He got a good hold on it. He pulled hard, and he pulled harder, but he could not bring it around to the front. Boris wasn't sure where he was going. For a moment he thought that he was in the middle of a sentence. The next minute he found himself walking down an empty street. Just then he was not trampled, barely, by a harnessed mare pulling along a crumbling carriage. Suddenly Boris became very old, and wise too. And then, as it happens some of the time with old and wise men, Boris fell over dead. At this point the story comes to a point, and that point is too narrow for the story to pass through. Boris had an itch. He scratched at the itch and around the itch and through the itch and into the itch. He scratched until it went away. He scratched at the itch all day. The next day it was still there, itchier than ever. Boris determined that the itch was part of him, just like the thought of the itch was part of him. He scratched away at the thought of the itch, took away the better part of the day, and another day was scratched away in this way. In vain cried the walls and the moldings. In vain cried the doors to the doormats. In vain cried the ceilings and fixtures. In vain cried the rain. In vain cried Ivan wherever Ivan went. And so the story goes out with Ivan's container and into a taxonomy of reverberations. Wave upon wave hit the itchy shore, scratching at the sand. So everything scratches in vain, and the weather scratches the weather vane. Once you start scratching, you just can't stop. The author reflected upon this thought. Boris sat on the floor thinking about the past. I have written a lot of things now, thought Boris, and there is still one thing I have not figured out. Boris thought about what that thing could be. Then he understood what he could not understand. I have not figured out, he said to himself, what words have to do with it. The author. There has never been a time in which I have been convinced from within myself that I am alive. Truly, when I believed in it, everything disappeared. What do people talk about? Asked Boris. It is true. The only categories left are nice and not nice, and these persuade our natures to bend and break and to be good. There was also how it used to be, which was, for the most part, nice. If it happened not to be nice, then it was certainly much better now. Boris had an idea. Then he sat down and wept. It is hard to say what it was that Boris had been thinking about before he stopped thinking about it. He closed the window. The author woke up one morning and wrote down all the things he had to do. Then he looked at his finger, the same finger he had had all his life at the end of his hand. All his life he had pointed at things with this finger, asking what they were, but he had never asked about his finger. A finger like any other, it should not have given him any pause to think even this day, but there it was, a finger at the end of his hand, extended and breaking at the edge into the end of him. He examined it closely and saw a singular finger. He tried pointing at this and that, but all he could see was his finger. Everything was his finger. Everything he touched now was a finger. A long time passed for everyone. He went through the list, moving his finger down the page. So much to do, so much to do. Boris was thirsty, so he watered his plants. When the plants died from being overwatered, Boris was still thirsty. Boris had no more plants to water, so he watered the sand that was left. The water sat in the sand and went nowhere. Boris was still thirsty. Boris went outside and watered the sea while no one was looking. The sea waved and nodded and waved again, but Boris was even thirstier, and the sea was no different for it. Boris had no water left. He rolled in the sand and became dirty. So that's all I'll read from this. Yeah, curious Boris. I think I've mapped it out, so I have time to read you a couple of Harms pieces. These are written by Daniel Harms, not by myself, in Russian, in Leningrad, which he called Petersburg all his life. He was born in 1905 and died in 1942 under very unpleasant circumstances, as you might imagine writers at those times. But really, he was a pretty marginal figure in terms of his work, or his what you might call it serious or adult work, whatever you call it. It's actually pretty close to his children's work. But he was known for his children's literature in his lifetime, and later, and still is somewhat of a classic in that respect. His work started to circulate again, or to circulate for the first time in the 60s in Russia and in Eastern Europe, and then was translated a little bit and so into various languages and so forth. And now he's sort of a cult figure in Russian literature. This certainly stands out. But in 1928, when he was sort of mentored by the old avant-garde, people like Malevich and so forth, he was involved in a group called the OBERU, the Union or Association for Real Art, and they did a lot of theatrical stuff. But by the early 30s, that was really shut down as the new Soviet culture formed and excluded everything avant-garde. So I'll just read a couple of these pieces. And I just reissued a chapbook of Alexander Vidensky's gray notebook. Harms has a blue notebook that's included in this book, but I did this translation. If you're interested, there's a couple of copies on the shelf that Maureen created. A couple of these pieces I co-translated with Eugene Ostashevsky and Simona Schneider, and this one we all collaborated on. The Four-Legged Crow. Once upon a time there lived a four-legged crow. Strictly speaking, it had 5 legs, but that's not worth talking about. One time the four-legged crow bought itself some coffee beans and thought, so I've bought coffee, now what do I do with it? Then, to make matters worse, a fox ran by. It spotted the crow and hollered to it, "Hey," it yelled, "you crow!" And the crow yelled back at the fox, "Crow yourself!" And the fox yelled at the crow, "You're a pig, crow, that's what you are." The crow was so insulted that it spilled the coffee, and the fox ran off. And the crow climbed down to the ground and went home on its 4, or to be precise, on its 5 legs to its lousy house. How easy it is for a person to get tangled up in insignificant things. You can walk for hours from the table to the wardrobe and from the wardrobe to the couch and never find a way out. You can even forget where you are and shoot arrows into some small cabinet on the wall. "Beware, cabinet," you can yell at it, "I'll get you." Or you can lie down on the floor and examine the dust. There is inspiration in this too. It's best to do it on a schedule in conformity with time, although it's difficult to determine the time limit, for what are the time limits of dust? It's even better to gaze into a tub of water. To look at water is always good for you and edifying. Even if you can't see anything in it, it's still good. We looked at the water and saw nothing in it, and soon we got bored. But we comforted ourselves that still we had done a good deed. We counted on our fingers. But what were we counting? We didn't know. For is water in any way countable? This is from the sequence, probably some of Harms's best-known work, if one can say that, called Incidences, or in my translation, Events. And it's one of the few things that Harms collected in a notebook and actually like gave titles to, like, and drew like a kind of title page, and it was really kind of making these little books that were just for friends, and sort of, this is one of the few things that seems like a finished work. A lot of these works, it's just coming out of, like, I was going to the manuscript department and looking at scraps of paper, basically, so, in Petersburg. But this is a real notebook and like a published, self-published, one copy. So this is the title of the story, Events. One day, Orlov stuffed himself with mashed peas and died. Krylov, having heard the news, also died, and Spiridonov died regardless. And Spiridonov's wife fell from the cupboard and also died, and the Spiridonov children drowned in a pond. Spiridonov's grandmother took to the bottle and wandered the highways, and Mikhailov stopped combing his hair and came down with mange, and Kruglov sketched a lady holding a whip and went mad, and Perekhostov received 400 rubles wired over the telegraph and was so uppity about it that he was forced to leave his job. All good people, but they don't know how to hold their ground. This is a much quoted piece. Next to this piece, in one version of it in one of the other notebooks I saw, in the margin, he wrote against Kant, and it's called Blue Notebook number 10, because it comes from the Blue Notebook. There was a red-headed man who had no eyes or ears. He didn't have hair either, so he was called a redhead arbitrarily. He couldn't talk because he had no mouth. He didn't have a nose either. He didn't even have arms or legs. He had no stomach. He had no back, no spine, and he didn't have any insides at all. There was nothing, so we don't even know who we're talking about. We'd better not talk about him anymore. I think I said something confusing. I was trying to say that Alexander Vidensky, the poet whose chapbook whose gray notebook I translated, was very close friends with Daniel Harms, and they started the Over You group together. So I just wanted to clarify if I had somehow made that information more complicated than it needed to be. Okay. And Vidensky is definitely one of my favorite Russian poets ever. Okay. So this is, now I'm going to go back to an inconsequential and very little-known American author living in New York named Matvei Yankelevich, who has written this long poem, and I'm going to read an excerpt from it. Okay. Oh, the poem is called Composition Book. This is from the middle. If there is a book I've never opened, well, let's just say it's the one I've been looking for all my wasted life. The moon is whatever it is I think I see above these regular buildings. Counting the syllables like lit up windows, I could drink myself drunk faster than you could untie this knot I've placed before you, letter after letter. As I've said before, I heard the actor say, it's my face and it isn't my face. It's my face and it isn't mine. It's mine, but it isn't my face. All of the above. On stage, a whiff of burning lights was solely responsible for the expression of what you took to be tragic self-awareness, and indifference so cold to the tragedy within oneself, all written as if on the face. My face. Ratty grass, the median, the slab of cement, more grass. My heritage walk. Seagull on the golden arches. Only my contemporaries would understand how white this shirt could be, or what a regional hospitality center makes of a landscape. The mess that is the land as country. The mess of material of overproduction spilling over the chain link of the horizon. In this horizontal theory, I become part of the workforce, and we become we, and that's supposed to be an improvement. I max out, you amass. We mark the time it will take to finish the job so that we might become ourselves for a progressive moment by capturing something essentially false about what might have been better but will surely get worse. By candlelight, by the light of the television screen or the personal nightlight for those too anxious to sleep, or the halo around the object of our faith in possibility or consolation on canvas or cross, cut away from what we were doing in the cubicle, in the field, at the service counter, in the car, or the surveillance tower, a vision of a new refreshing drink to get through the day all the way to that distant billboard shining out awash with light, a rectangular frame that gives meaning. The representation is clearer than before, enhanced by the knowledge of its true intention. Who needs windows? A seagull alights on golden arches, gentlemen's club painted pink. The game is on. The moment comes when you recognize the river is falling, not flowing as our words might have it, just as the recognition of the object in view as poem, a preconditioned response, applause from the balcony, the full moon over the parking lot. You could imagine it better, singularly, the painted flames on the hood of a truck down to earth, the evening star paradox, springtime lane, even that is a dead end. I put one foot ahead of the other, but I'm still tethered to the wage. Style gave up the ghost, making way for choice. Make waves, but be sure they don't drown you out. Easy does it. Sign here your commitment to the cause of indecision, there and back again. I could have been a dialectician. It's just the material that drives me nuts. I want to have all your children, I mean all of you, with all of you, lots of children with public health care, children on welfare, little ones at the county fair, bare-assed children running around like nature, free as leaves born on the lofty wind. Russia, why do we even speak of you? How Russian is it, anyway? Foul place, fouled up beyond repair, a swamp for souls. The more mired they are, the hardier they beat their chests. What fate less enviable than to be born with talent on that crushing plain? And who doesn't know a friend who was almost killed by a minivan? It's about time he published a book about it, making it up as I go along, one of my few strong suits, a winning hand, one-eyed jacks and spades. Running away from the story instead of running with it, like what's playing tonight? My fly is down for the count. Armpit overgrown with years, poetry moves predictably, easy to track. Pull the trigger and watch it defamiliarize. The sentence speaks volumes, the light changes, shades that mark the time it takes. What have I learned from you, poem? I don't recall. I don't remember anything from last night. I think I was happy though, down to the basic unit of existence, a wisp of smoke, 2 or 3 wisps. The problem is the days waning before even breakfast, or words that don't come together, coming together being something of a gold standard. You'd feel better if you dressed weller. I thought that it would go away, that you'd go away, that we'd go away together again and again. One way to say the same thing is happening more than once. Now I want to make you appreciate a desire and its apparent truth value. A quiet evening at home or potential self-destruction, have another. The pasta cooks in the time it takes to smoke a cigarette, but a tad overdone, wouldn't you say so? I said so, because I say so, that's what's up. The 10th corporation taps out rhythm for labor. I know what I'm saying. Who's with us? Everyone who's not against us. Everyone who's not hanging from a tree. The corpses of our fathers. That's how it goes, not how it is. Or, if I had it, you know I'd give it to you. Something cold in the woods, damp clearings in darkness between the fir trees and the oaks. The aesthetic doesn't have a chance. I've glued this together to emphasize just how apart I am from what binds us. Sun comes in morning, then clouds, brought by wind we imagine, whir of motor, sweep of rain, modern alienation. Clover takes over the plowed under earth. Sharp whip of the sign, the letter's dark stroke. Marinetti vrooms, Mayakovsky booms. George Oppen say, if you see a tree, you must include it, must write tree. I haven't read enough Oppen. I've eaten a lot of bagels and ridden a lot of trees. No thank you, John the bookseller. I don't want to use the antibacterial hand sanitizer. I'm old-fashioned. I'll just wash my hands of it. Yes, the amount of it out there bothers me, but what bothers me more are arguments against the amount of it, and the people who make them who are all bothered by it, and in the end are bores. There is a sunny side of the street, but I'm not on it. I'm on the other side of the street. I have both scarf and hat on. Some people have accomplished today the washing of their automobiles, the trimming of their nails, a good day's work. I'm speeding myself up and slowing myself down, a process by which I remain. Is this floor dirty? Is it dirty enough to be cleaned? Dirty enough to be the ground we walk on? Like Valser, I want to get under it all. Would that be lower than the grass? They promised rain. How can I get some if it doesn't come? The trail is a loop. Nothing can be said about its content, except that there were some ducks in the pond. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.